The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez walked through the corridors of the Pentagon. Her boots echoed against the polished floors, each step measured and precise. At 28, she had already served 3 tours overseas, each one leaving its mark on her weathered face and steady gaze. The silver star pinned to her dress uniform caught the fluorescent light, a reminder of the day that had changed everything. Elena had never expected to be standing in these hallways, surrounded by officers whose ranks far exceeded her own. She was a sniper, a woman who found comfort in the silence of long-range positions and the clarity that came with the target in her scope. Politics and bureaucracy were foreign territories she had never wanted to navigate. Yet here she was, summoned to Washington for reasons that had been deliberately vague in the official orders. The conference room door stood before her, imposing and final. Through the frosted glass, she could make out several figures seated around a long table. Her handler, Colonel James Mitchell, had briefed her the night before, his usually calm demeanor replaced by something that looked suspiciously like worry. The military was facing increased scrutiny about combat effectiveness and the role of women in frontline positions. Elena's record, he explained, had attracted attention from the highest levels of command. As she raised her hand to knock, Elena's mind drifted to the mountains of Afghanistan, where everything had started. The memory was as clear as if it had happened yesterday, rather than 6 months ago. Her unit had been pinned down by enemy fire for nearly 18 hours. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in a series of caves and rocky outcroppings that provided perfect cover while giving them commanding views of the valley below. She had been positioned nearly 800 meters away, her rifle trained on the enemy positions. One by one, she had methodically eliminated the threats, each shot carefully calculated for wind speed, distance, and the precise moment when her target would be most vulnerable. By the time the siege ended, 17 enemy combatants lay dead, and her unit had been able to extract safely without a single casualty. The official report had been filed, witness statements collected, and commendations recommended. Elena had thought that would be the end of it. She had returned to base, cleaned her rifle, and prepared for the next mission. That was how it had always worked. Complete the mission, file the paperwork, move on to the next assignment. The military was a machine that kept moving forward, and she was simply one small but essential part of its operation. But the attention had been unwelcome and persistent. Journalists had somehow gotten hold of her story, turning her into a symbol of women's capabilities in combat roles. Politicians had used her name in speeches about military effectiveness and gender equality. Defense contractors had even reached out, offering lucrative consulting positions that would have taken her far from the battlefield she knew and understood. Elena had rejected it all, preferring the anonymity that had always been her shield. She was not interested in becoming a poster child for anyone's agenda. She was a Marine, trained to complete missions and protect her fellow service members. The gender politics that seemed to fascinate everyone else were irrelevant to her. A target was a target, regardless of whether the person behind the rifle was male or female. The door opened before she could knock, revealing a stern-faced aide who gestured for her to enter. The conference room was larger than she had expected, dominated by a mahogany table that could seat 20 people. Only 5 chairs were occupied, but the presence of the men sitting in them seemed to fill the entire space. Elena recognized most of them from photographs and briefings. These were the generals who made decisions that affected thousands of lives, men whose words could shift entire military strategies. At the head of the table sat General Robert Harrison, a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm front. He was in his early 60s, with gray hair cropped in a military cut that had not changed since his days as a second lieutenant. His uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and medal positioned with mathematical precision. Elena had heard stories about Harrison's rise through the ranks, his unwavering dedication to military tradition, and his strong opinions about the proper roles of different service members. The general looked up as she entered, his pale blue eyes studying her with the intensity of someone accustomed to making snap judgments about people. Elena snapped to attention, offering a crisp salute that Harrison returned with minimal effort. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. She could feel the weight of the other officers' stares, each one evaluating her presence in this room that rarely saw anyone below the rank of colonel. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Harrison's voice carried the authority of decades in command. "I've been reading your file. Quite interesting reading, I must say." He gestured to a thick folder that lay open before him. Pages of documentation that represented Elena's entire military career reduced to typed reports and statistical summaries. Elena remained at attention, her gaze fixed on a point just above Harrison's head. "Thank you, sir. Tell me, Rodriguez, do you believe everything in this file is accurate?" The question carried an undertone that made Elena's stomach tighten. This was not the routine debriefing she had expected. "Yes, sir. The reports were filed according to standard procedure and reviewed by my chain of command." Harrison leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the polished wood of the table. 17 confirmed kills in a single engagement. That's quite a claim, especially for someone who's been in active combat for less than 4 years. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. "The engagement was thoroughly documented, sir. Multiple witnesses, video reconnaissance, and physical confirmation of targets." "Witnesses can be mistaken," Harrison replied, his tone suggesting that he had already reached his conclusions about the matter. "Video can be unclear. Physical confirmation in a combat zone is often incomplete." One of the other officers, a colonel Elena did not recognize, leaned forward. "General Harrison, the initial reports were quite clear. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's performance during that engagement was exceptional by any standard." Harrison's gaze never left Elena's face. "Exceptional, yes, but also convenient. At a time when the military is under pressure to demonstrate the effectiveness of women in combat roles, having a female sniper with such impressive statistics certainly serves certain political purposes." The accusation was clear now, even though Harrison had been careful not to state it directly. Elena felt her jaw clench, but she forced herself to remain professional. "Sir, my only concern during that engagement was the safety of my unit and the successful completion of our mission." "I'm sure it was." Harrison's smile was cold and calculating. "But the fact remains that your claimed kill count is significantly higher than what we would expect from someone of your experience level. It raises questions about the accuracy of combat reporting and whether proper verification procedures are being followed in the field." Elena's mind raced through the events of that day in Afghanistan. Every shot had been deliberate, every target confirmed through her scope before she pulled the trigger. The enemy had been well-positioned, but not invisible. Their muzzle flashes had given away their positions, and their movement patterns had been predictable. She had simply done her job with the precision and dedication that the Marines had trained into her. "General," she said carefully, "I understand your concerns about accuracy in reporting. If there are questions about my performance, I'm willing to undergo any verification process you deem appropriate." Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you suggesting that we conduct some sort of test to verify your capabilities? If that's what it takes to resolve any doubts about my record, then yes, sir." The room fell silent again. Elena could feel the tension building, as if everyone present understood that they had reached a crucial moment. Harrison exchanged glances with the other officers, some sort of silent communication passing between them. When he turned back to Elena, his expression had shifted to something that might have been anticipation. "Very well, Staff Sergeant. If you're confident in your abilities, then we'll arrange for a comprehensive evaluation. You'll be given the opportunity to demonstrate your skills under controlled conditions. If you can replicate the performance described in your combat reports, then all questions about your record will be put to rest." Elena nodded, though she felt a chill of apprehension. "What kind of evaluation, sir?" "The details will be worked out by my staff," Harrison replied, closing her file with a sharp snap. "But I can tell you that it will be thorough. We'll want to test not just your marksmanship, but your ability to perform under pressure, your tactical awareness, and your capacity to make the kind of split-second decisions that combat requires." The general stood, and Elena snapped back to attention. The meeting was clearly over, but the weight of what had just been decided hung heavy in the air. As she prepared to leave, Harrison's voice stopped her at the door. "Rodriguez, I want you to understand something. This isn't personal. It's about maintaining the integrity of our reporting systems and ensuring that the standards we hold ourselves to are consistent across all service members. If your record is accurate, then you have nothing to worry about." Elena turned back to face him. "And if you're wrong about me, sir?" Harrison's smile was sharp as a blade. "Then you'll have the satisfaction of proving it." As Elena left the conference room, Her mind was already working through the implications of what had just happened. She had been challenged in front of senior officers, her integrity questioned, and her service record treated as suspect. The anger she felt was cold and focused, the same emotion that had carried her through her darkest moments in combat. Walking through the Pentagon corridors, Elena thought about the 17 lives she had taken in Afghanistan. Each face was burned into her memory, not with regret, but with the grim satisfaction of a job completed successfully. Those men had been trying to kill her fellow Marines, and she had stopped them with the skills and training that the military had spent years developing in her. Now those same skills were being questioned by men who had never felt the weight of a rifle in a combat zone, who had never made the calculations that turn a human being into a target, who had never experienced the absolute clarity that came with knowing that failure meant the death of the people counting on you. The challenge had been issued and accepted. Elena would prove herself again, this time under the watchful eyes of generals who seemed determined to find fault with the record. But she had faced impossible odds before, and she had always found a way to succeed. As she stepped out into the Washington sunlight, Elena Rodriguez began planning for the most important mission of her military career. The enemy this time would not be Taliban fighters hidden in mountain caves, but the prejudices and preconceptions of her own command structure. The stakes were just as high, and failure was not an option she was willing to consider. The war for her reputation was about to begin, and Elena intended to win it with the same precision and determination that had made her one of the most effective snipers in the Marine Corps. General Harrison had made his move, but Elena knew something he did not yet understand. When a Marine is backed into a corner, they don't surrender. They fight harder. The Quantico Marine Base felt different than Elena remembered from her training days. The familiar buildings and ranges now seemed to carry an atmosphere of judgment, as if every corner held observers waiting to catch her in a mistake. 3 weeks had passed since her confrontation with General Harrison, and the evaluation he had promised was finally about to begin. Elena stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside the armory, her breath visible in the cold Virginia air. Colonel Mitchell approached from the direction of the administrative buildings, his expression troubled. Over the past weeks, he had become her unofficial advocate, working behind the scenes to ensure that whatever test Harrison had designed would be fair and comprehensive. They finalized the evaluation parameters, Mitchell said without preamble. It's extensive, Rodriguez. More comprehensive than anything I've seen for someone of your rank. Elena adjusted the straps of her gear bag. What exactly am I looking at, sir? Mitchell pulled out a tablet and scrolled through several pages of documentation. 5 different phases of testing over the next 4 days. Long-range precision shooting, mobile target engagement, urban warfare scenarios, psychological evaluation, and something they're calling extreme pressure simulation. The list was intimidating, designed to push her beyond normal operational parameters. Elena had expected something challenging, but this appeared to be an attempt to break her rather than simply verify her capabilities. Who designed this evaluation, Colonel? Harrison's people, with input from some civilian consultants. They brought in experts from various special operations units to observe and assess your performance. Mitchell's tone suggested he had his own concerns about the fairness of the process. As they walked toward the firing ranges, Elena noticed an unusual amount of activity for such an early hour. Vehicles with government plates were parked near the observation areas, and she could see figures moving in the distance. The evaluation had attracted attention from well beyond the Marine Corps command structure. The first shooting position was unlike anything Elena had encountered in her training or combat experience. The targets were placed at varying distances from 600 to 1,200 meters, positioned to simulate the challenging terrain conditions she might face in actual combat. Wind flags indicated shifting air currents that would require constant adjustment to her calculations. Master Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Chun, the range master who would oversee her shooting tests, approached with a clipboard and stopwatch. Elena had worked with Chun during her advanced sniper training, and she respected his expertise and attention to detail. His presence was one of the few reassuring elements of the entire situation. Rodriguez, you'll have 45 minutes to engage 20 targets at various ranges and elevations. Each target will be exposed for a limited time window, and you'll need to factor in environmental conditions that will change throughout the exercise. Chen's professional demeanor didn't quite hide his concern for what she was facing. Elena nodded and began setting up her rifle, the same weapon system she had used in Afghanistan. The familiar weight and balance helped calm her nerves as she ran through her pre-shooting checklist. Focus was everything in long-range shooting, and she could not afford to let the pressure of observation affect her performance. From the elevated observation deck, she could see several figures watching through binoculars and spotting scopes. General Harrison was among them, his posture rigid with expectation. Next to him stood a woman in civilian clothes whom Elena did not recognize, taking notes on a tablet with military efficiency. The first target appeared at 800 meters, a standard silhouette that popped up behind an earthwork barrier. Elena settled into her shooting position, controlling her breathing as she adjusted her scope for range and windage. The target remained exposed for 30 seconds, enough time for multiple shots, but requiring immediate recognition and engagement. Her first shot struck center mass, the impact clearly visible through her scope. The target dropped, and she immediately shifted to scan for the next exposure. The rhythm of combat shooting began to take over, her movements becoming automatic as muscle memory and training guided her actions. Target after target fell to her precise shooting, each engagement requiring split-second calculations and adjustments. The wind conditions changed as predicted, forcing her to compensate for deflection that would have sent less experienced shooters wide of their marks. Elena found herself settling into the focused state that had served her so well in Afghanistan, where the outside world faded away and only the target mattered. At the 20-minute mark, she had successfully engaged 14 targets without a miss. The remaining 6 were positioned at maximum range and partially concealed behind obstacles that simulated the kind of cover that enemy fighters would use in actual combat. These shots would require not just precision, but creative thinking about bullet trajectory and environmental factors. Elena took a moment to assess the wind conditions, noting how the flags at different distances indicated varying air currents. The longest shot would be at nearly 1,300 meters, beyond the effective range of many sniper rifles, but well within the capabilities of her weapon system if properly employed. She adjusted her position slightly, finding a more stable rest for her rifle. The target at maximum range was barely visible through her scope, a dark shape against the natural background. Elena calculated the holdover required for such an extreme distance, factoring in the temperature and altitude that would affect her bullet's trajectory. The shot broke cleanly, her trigger control smooth and consistent. Through her scope, she watched the bullet's path as it arced toward the distant target. The impact was slightly low, but still within the vital zone, a successful engagement at a range that few shooters could manage consistently. The remaining targets fell in rapid succession, Elena's confidence building with each successful shot. When the final target dropped to the 40-minute mark, she had achieved a perfect score under conditions that would have challenged even the most experienced combat veterans. As she cleared her rifle and prepared to move to the next phase, Elena noticed increased activity in the observation area. Several of the watching officers were engaged in animated discussions, and she could see Harrison speaking intensely with the civilian observer. Whatever they had expected from this first test, her performance had clearly exceeded their predictions. The mobile target engagement phase took place on a different range, designed to simulate the kind of moving targets that presented themselves in urban combat environments. Elena would need to engage threats while moving herself, requiring the kind of instinctive shooting that separated truly elite marksmen from merely competent ones. The scenario began with Elena positioned behind a series of barriers representing a damaged building. Targets would appear at various distances and exposure times, some moving laterally while others advanced directly toward her position. She would need to prioritize threats based on distance and danger level, making tactical decisions while maintaining accurate fire. The first targets appeared simultaneously at different ranges, forcing Elena to make immediate decisions about engagement priority. She chose the closest threat first, a moving target at 300 meters that was advancing rapidly toward her position. Her shot dropped the target cleanly, and she immediately transitioned to a more distant threat that was moving laterally across her field of view. The physical demands of the exercise were significant, requiring Elena to move between different shooting positions while maintaining situational awareness and accuracy. Sweat began to build under her equipment as she navigated obstacles and engaged targets that appeared with increasing frequency and complexity. By the midpoint of the exercise, Elena had successfully engaged 12 of 15 targets. with only minor errors in her shot placement. The remaining scenarios were designed to push her to the limits of her capabilities, with multiple moving targets appearing simultaneously and requiring rapid transitions between vastly different ranges. Elena's training took over completely as the exercise intensified. Years of drilling movement and shooting techniques had created automatic responses that allowed her to engage targets without conscious thought about mechanics. Her body moved with practiced efficiency, finding stable shooting positions and breaking accurate shots while under significant physical stress. The final phase of the mobile exercise presented the most challenging scenario yet. Elena was required to move through a series of obstacles while targets appear behind her, forcing her to turn and engage threats from awkward positions. The time pressure was intense, with targets exposed for only brief moments before disappearing. Elena spun to engage a target behind her left shoulder, dropping to one knee to find a stable position for the shot. Her bullet struck the target's center mass just before it disappeared, and she immediately rolled to her right to avoid simulated incoming fire while searching for the next threat. The exercise concluded with Elena having successfully engaged 19 of 20 targets, an exceptional performance that surpassed the standard expected for even special operations personnel. As she cleared her weapon and prepared for the next phase, she could see the observers in heated discussion about what they had witnessed. Colonel Mitchell approached during the break between exercises, his expression mixing pride with concern. "Outstanding shooting, Rodriguez. But I need to warn you about what's coming next." Elena wiped sweat from her face and checked her equipment. "What kind of warning, sir?" "The urban warfare scenarios they've designed are unlike anything in standard training. They've brought in contractors who specialize in creating psychological pressure situations. The goal appears to be testing your decision-making under extreme stress, rather than just your marksmanship." The implications were clear. Harrison and his team were looking for weaknesses in her performance, ways to discredit her combat record by pushing her beyond normal operational parameters. Elena had expected such tactics, but hearing them confirmed still created a knot of tension in her stomach. "Any advice, Colonel?" Mitchell's smile was grim. "Remember who you are and why you're here. Don't let them get into your head. Your record speaks for itself, and today you're proving that beyond any doubt." The urban warfare simulation took place in a specialized facility that replicated the complex environment of city fighting. Buildings, alleyways, and rooftops created a three-dimensional battlefield where threats could appear from any direction. Elena would be working with live ammunition against computerized targets that could return simulated fire, adding an element of personal risk to the evaluation. As she entered the urban environment, Elena felt the familiar heightening of senses that came with potential combat. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every window could conceal a sniper position. Every sound could indicate enemy movement. The simulation was designed to be as realistic as possible while maintaining safety protocols. The first scenario required Elena to clear a building methodically, engaging targets while avoiding civilian mannequins positioned throughout the structure. The complexity was enormous, requiring split-second decisions about friend or foe while maintaining accuracy under pressure. A single mistake could result in simulated civilian casualties that would be recorded as failures in her evaluation. Elena moved through the building with practiced efficiency, her rifle ready and her eyes scanning constantly for threats. The first target appeared in a doorway, partially concealed behind cover that required precise shot placement to avoid hitting the civilian mannequin positioned nearby. Her bullet found its mark, and she continued her advance through the structure. Floor by floor, Elena cleared the building with methodical precision. Each room presented new challenges and tactical decisions, testing not just her shooting ability, but her understanding of urban combat principles. The scenarios grew increasingly complex as she progressed, with multiple threats appearing simultaneously and requiring rapid prioritization. The final building scenario placed Elena in a position where she had to engage targets at various elevations while simulated enemy fire rained down around her position. The psychological pressure was intense, with loud sound effects and realistic visual simulations creating an environment that closely approximated actual combat conditions. Elena found a firing position behind a concrete barrier and began engaging targets on the surrounding buildings. Her shots were precise despite the chaos around her, each bullet finding its intended target while she maintained awareness of her own tactical situation. The training and experience from her combat deployments served her well, providing the mental framework needed to function effectively under such pressure. When the urban simulation ended, Elena had successfully completed every scenario without a single significant error. Her target engagement had been flawless, her tactical movement efficient, and her decision-making under pressure exemplary. As she exited the simulation facility, she could see the observers in animated discussion about her performance. The day was far from over, but Elena had already demonstrated capabilities that exceeded what most evaluators had expected. The psychological evaluation and extreme pressure simulation still awaited, but she felt confident in her ability to meet whatever challenges Harrison and his team had prepared. As she cleaned her rifle and prepared for the next phase, Elena reflected on the irony of her situation. She was being tested and evaluated by people who had never faced the kind of pressure she dealt with routinely in combat. Their academic understanding of warfare was comprehensive, but it lacked the practical experience that came from making life and death decisions under fire. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Elena felt ready to face them with the same determination that had carried her through 3 combat deployments. General Harrison had designed these tests to break her, but he had underestimated the strength that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of accomplishing. The second day of evaluation began before sunrise, but Elena was already awake when her alarm sounded. Sleep had been elusive, her mind replaying the previous day's events and anticipating what challenges lay ahead. The psychological evaluation was scheduled for the morning, followed by what the briefing documents vaguely described as extreme pressure simulation. Elena made her way to the psychology building, a modern structure that housed the Marine Corps' Behavioral Science Research Unit. Dr. Sarah Winchester, the civilian observer from the previous day, met her at the entrance. She was a woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of intense focus that Elena associated with people who spent their lives studying human behavior under stress. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I'm Dr. Winchester from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. I'll be conducting your psychological evaluation today. Her handshake was firm, her manner professional, but not unfriendly. The events in Afghanistan were deeply personal, moments of life and death that had shaped her understanding of herself and her capabilities as a Marine. What would you like to know, ma'am? Dr. Winchester leaned forward slightly. I'm interested in your psychological state during that 18-hour engagement. How did you maintain focus and accuracy while under sustained enemy fire? The question required Elena to revisit memories she had carefully compartmentalized. Combat was something that happened, was survived, and was then filed away in the parts of her mind reserved for experiences too intense for casual reflection. Bringing those memories into the sterile environment of the evaluation room felt like a violation of their significance. Training and experience, Elena replied. The Marine Corps prepared me for those conditions, and I had previous combat deployments that taught me how to manage stress and maintain operational effectiveness. Dr. Winchester made notes on her tablet, but training can only prepare someone so much. What personal qualities allowed you to exceed normal performance parameters during that engagement? Elena considered the question carefully. The truth was complex and deeply personal, involving aspects of her character and motivation that she rarely discussed with anyone. But the evaluation required honesty, and Dr. Winchester's professional demeanor suggested she could handle whatever Elena chose to share. I knew that my unit was depending on me, Elena said slowly. Marines were going to die if I didn't do my job effectively. That knowledge provided a level of focus that training alone couldn't create. Every shot I took was about keeping my fellow service members alive. The session continued for nearly 2 hours, with Dr. Winchester probing Elena's motivations, her decision-making processes under stress, and her ability to cope with the psychological demands of combat. Some questions were straightforward and professional, while others seemed designed to uncover vulnerabilities or inconsistencies in her mental state. Dr. Winchester asked about Elena's childhood, her reasons for joining the military, and her long-term career goals. She explored Elena's relationships with fellow service members, her methods for managing combat stress, and her feelings about taking human lives in the line of duty. The questions were penetrating and sometimes uncomfortable, but Elena answered them with the same directness she brought to every aspect of her military service. Let's discuss the 17 confirmed kills from Afghanistan, Dr. Winchester said during the final portion of the evaluation. That's an unusually high number for a single engagement, even for an experienced sniper. How confident are you in the accuracy of that count? Elena felt a familiar surge of anger at the implication behind the question. Completely confident. Each target was visually confirmed before and after engagement. My spotter verified every shot, and the results were documented according to standard procedure. But in the chaos of an 18-hour firefight, isn't it possible that some assessments might have been inaccurate? No, ma'am. I don't take shots unless I'm certain of my target and confident in my ability to neutralize the threat. 17 enemies were killed by my rifle fire during that engagement, and I could provide detailed information about each shot if required. Dr. Winchester made extensive notes about Elena's response, her expression revealing nothing about her assessment of Elena's truthfulness or psychological state. When the session finally ended, Elena felt drained in a way that combat had never left her. Discussing her most intense experiences with a stranger who had never faced similar challenges was emotionally exhausting and vaguely humiliating. The afternoon brought the extreme pressure simulation, which took place in a facility Elena had never seen before. The building was unmarked and heavily secured, requiring special clearance for entry. Inside, she found a complex array of equipment and monitoring devices that suggested this was no ordinary training exercise. Major David Santos, a special operations officer Elena didn't recognize, briefed her on the simulation parameters. This exercise is designed to replicate the kind of extreme stress and decision-making pressure you might face in the most challenging combat situations. You'll be required to make tactical decisions while under significant physical and psychological stress. Elena was fitted with monitoring equipment that would track her heart rate, blood pressure, and other physiological indicators throughout the exercise. The simulation chamber itself was a sophisticated environment that could replicate various combat scenarios with remarkable realism. You'll be presented with a series of tactical scenarios, Major Santos explained. Each one will require immediate decisions about target engagement, rules of engagement, and tactical movement. The scenarios will become progressively more challenging and morally complex as the exercise continues. The first scenario placed Elena in a sniper position overlooking a village where intelligence indicated enemy combatants were holding civilian hostages. She had to identify legitimate targets while avoiding civilian casualties, making split-second decisions about who represented a threat and who was an innocent bystander. Through her scope, Elena could see figures moving through the village streets. Some carried weapons and moved with the tactical awareness of trained fighters, while others appeared to be civilians going about their daily activities. The challenge was distinguishing between the two groups in a dynamic situation where appearances could be deceiving. Elena identified her first target, a man carrying an assault rifle who was moving toward a building where civilians were sheltering. Her shot dropped him cleanly, and she immediately shifted to scan for additional threats. The scenario continued with increasing complexity, adding time pressure and additional variables that complicated her decision-making process. Each subsequent scenario presented more challenging moral and tactical dilemmas. Elena was forced to make decisions about engaging targets in close proximity to civilians, choosing between multiple threats that required immediate attention, and operating under rules of engagement that were deliberately ambiguous or conflicting. The psychological pressure was intense, designed to push Elena beyond her comfort zone and test her ability to maintain tactical effectiveness while under extreme stress. Sound effects simulated incoming fire and explosions, while visual elements created the chaos and confusion of actual combat environments. Elena found herself drawing on every aspect of her training and experience as the scenarios intensified. The monitoring equipment showed elevated stress indicators, but her decision-making remained clear and consistent. Years of combat experience had taught her to function effectively even when overwhelmed by sensory input and time pressure. The most challenging scenario placed Elena in a situation where she had to choose between engaging a high-value target who was using a child as a human shield or allowing the target to escape while potentially endangering other civilian lives. The moral complexity was enormous. requiring her to weigh competing priorities while under extreme time pressure. Elena held her fire, choosing to track the target while looking for an opportunity to engage without risking civilian casualties. Her patience was rewarded when the target moved away from the child, providing a clear shot that she took without hesitation. The decision demonstrated both tactical skill and moral judgment under pressure. When the simulation ended, Elena was physically and emotionally exhausted. The scenarios had pushed her to the limits of her decision-making capabilities while testing her ability to maintain moral and tactical standards under extreme pressure. The monitoring equipment had recorded detailed data about her physiological responses throughout the exercise. Major Santos approached as Elena removed the monitoring equipment. His expression was professional, but seemed to carry a note of respect that hadn't been present at the beginning of the exercise. Outstanding performance, Staff Sergeant. You maintained tactical effectiveness and appropriate moral judgment throughout scenarios that have challenged much more experienced personnel. Elena nodded, still processing the intensity of what she had just experienced. The simulation had been more demanding than most of her actual combat experiences, designed to compress maximum stress into a controlled environment. As she left the simulation facility, Elena reflected on the day's events. The psychological evaluation had been probing and sometimes uncomfortable, but she felt confident that she had represented herself honestly and professionally. The extreme pressure simulation had been physically and emotionally demanding, but her performance had been consistent with her combat record. The third day would bring the final phases of the evaluation, including a comprehensive review of her performance by the panel of observers. Elena knew that General Harrison and his supporters would be looking for any weaknesses or inconsistencies they could use to discredit her record. That evening, Elena called her sister Maria, the only family member she maintained close contact with. Maria worked as a nurse in their hometown of San Antonio, and her perspective on Elena's military service was both supportive and realistic. "How's the evaluation going?" Maria asked without preamble. She had always been direct in her communication, a trait Elena appreciated. "It's intense, but manageable," Elena replied. "They're trying to prove that my combat record is exaggerated or inaccurate." "And is it?" Elena smiled at her sister's bluntness. "No. If anything, the official records understate what happened in Afghanistan. I did my job, and I did it well." "Then, prove it to them," Maria said simply. "You've never backed down from a challenge, and this isn't the time to start." The conversation reminded Elena why she was enduring this evaluation. It wasn't just about defending her own record, but about proving that women could serve effectively in combat roles when given the opportunity. The military had invested years in training her, and she owed it to future female service members to demonstrate that the investment had been worthwhile. The fourth day began with a comprehensive marksmanship test that would challenge every aspect of Elena's shooting skills. The course was designed by Master Chief Petty Officer William Hayes, a Navy SEAL instructor whose reputation for creating challenging training scenarios was legendary throughout the special operations community. Elena found herself facing targets at distances ranging from 50 meters to over a mile, positioned in conditions that simulated every possible combat environment. Desert, urban, mountainous, and jungle scenarios were all represented, each requiring different approaches to environmental factors and target engagement. The long-range portion of the test was particularly demanding, with targets placed at distances that pushed the effective range of her rifle system. Wind conditions were deliberately challenging, with shifting patterns that required constant adjustment to her calculations. Elena found herself relying on skills and knowledge that had been developed through years of practical experience. At 800 meters, she engaged a series of targets that appeared for brief exposure windows. The shots required precise timing and flawless execution, with no margin for error in her calculations or technique. Elena's training took over completely, her movements automatic and efficient as she engaged target after target with mechanical precision. The 1,000-meter targets presented even greater challenges, requiring her to account for environmental factors that became increasingly significant at extended ranges. Temperature, humidity, and air pressure all affected bullet trajectory at such distances, demanding calculations that went beyond basic marksmanship skills. Elena's final shot of the long-range portion struck a target at 1,200 meters, a distance at which many rifle systems began to reach the limits of their effective range. The shot was perfect, striking center mass despite environmental conditions that would have defeated less skilled marksmen. Master Chief Hayes approached as Elena cleared her rifle. His expression was unreadable, but Elena detected a note of professional respect in his manner. Exceptional shooting, Staff Sergeant. I've seen special operations personnel with decades of experience who couldn't match that performance. The compliment meant more to Elena than the praise from officers who had never held a rifle in combat conditions. Hayes had seen the best shooters the military had to offer, and his assessment carried weight that transcended rank or political considerations. The final phase of the evaluation was a comprehensive review session with General Harrison and his panel of observers. Elena was called to a conference room similar to the one where this entire process had begun, but the atmosphere was markedly different. The data from 4 days of intensive testing had been compiled and analyzed, creating a comprehensive picture of her capabilities and performance. General Harrison sat at the head of the table, the same position he had occupied during their first meeting. But his expression had changed, no longer carrying the skepticism and barely concealed hostility that had characterized their initial encounter. Next to him sat Dr. Winchester, Major Santos, Master Chief Hayes, and several other officers who had observed various portions of the evaluation. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Harrison began, his tone formal but lacking its previous edge. We've completed our analysis of your evaluation performance. The results are comprehensive. Elena remained at attention, waiting for the verdict that would determine her future in the Marine Corps. The past 4 days had pushed her beyond normal performance parameters, testing every aspect of her capabilities as a Marine and as a person. Your marksmanship scores exceed the standards for special operations personnel, Harrison continued, consulting a tablet that contained the evaluation results. Your performance under pressure was exemplary, and your tactical decision-making was consistent with that of much more experienced personnel. Dr. Winchester leaned forward to add her assessment. The psychological evaluation revealed an individual with exceptional stress tolerance and moral clarity under pressure. Your ability to maintain tactical effectiveness while adhering to ethical standards is remarkable. Elena felt a surge of vindication, but kept her expression neutral. The evaluation had been designed to discredit her, but the results spoke for themselves with an authority that transcended personal opinions or institutional prejudices. General Harrison closed the tablet and looked directly at Elena. Based on these results, I am prepared to state that your combat record from Afghanistan is not only accurate, but likely understates your actual capabilities. Your performance during this evaluation demonstrates skills and judgment that exceed normal expectations for someone of your rank and experience. The admission was everything Elena had hoped for, but Harrison's expression suggested that the conversation was far from over. Something in his manner indicated that acknowledgement of her capabilities came with complications she had not yet considered. The silence in the conference room stretched longer than Elena had expected. General Harrison's admission of her capabilities should have marked the end of the evaluation process, but the tension in the room suggested that something significant remained unresolved. Elena maintained her position at attention, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Dr. Winchester was the first to break the silence, consulting her notes with a methodical attention to detail that Elena had observed throughout the psychological evaluation. General Harrison, there's an additional matter we need to discuss with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Harrison nodded grimly. Rodriguez, your performance during this evaluation has been exemplary. In fact, it's been so exceptional that it's created a new set of problems we need to address. Elena felt a familiar knot of tension in her stomach. Military bureaucracy had a way of turning success into complications, and she sensed that her vindication was about to come with unexpected consequences. Sir, she prompted when Harrison seemed to hesitate. Your capabilities exceed what we normally see in conventional forces, Harrison continued. The special operations community has taken notice of your evaluation results. There are discussions about reassignment possibilities that would place you in more specialized roles. The implications hit Elena immediately. Special operations units operated under different rules and faced different challenges than conventional Marine units. Assignment to such a unit would be a professional honor, but it would also mean leaving behind the Marine she had served with and the mission structure she understood. Major Santos leaned forward. Staff Sergeant, The evaluation data suggests that you're operating at a level consistent with Tier 1 Special Operations personnel. That kind of capability is too valuable to waste in conventional assignments. Elena had heard rumors about personnel being recruited into special operations based on exceptional performance, but she had never seriously considered the possibility for herself. Her identity as a Marine was deeply rooted in the conventional forces where she had built her career and established her reputation. "What kind of reassignment are we discussing, sir?" Elena asked carefully. Harrison exchanged glances with the other officers before answering. "Several options are being considered. Delta Force has expressed interest, as has the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. There's also a joint task force being formed that specifically requires personnel with your skill set." The names carried weight that made Elena's pulse quicken. These were units that operated in the shadows, taking on missions that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. Assignment to such units was often a one-way career path, leading to years of classified operations and separation from normal military life. Dr. Winchester added her perspective. "The psychological evaluation indicates that you have the mental resilience and moral judgment necessary for the most challenging special operations missions. Your ability to make ethical decisions under extreme pressure is particularly valuable for units that operate with minimal oversight." Elena found herself in the strange position of being offered opportunities she had never sought, based on capabilities she had developed simply by doing her job to the best of her ability. The evaluation that had begun as a challenge to her integrity was becoming a gateway to career possibilities she had never considered. "I need to understand something," Elena said, choosing her words carefully. "Is this reassignment being offered as an option, or is it a requirement based on the evaluation results?" Harrison's expression softened slightly. "It's an option, Rodriguez. You've proven yourself beyond any doubt, and you've earned a right to choose your own path. But I want you to understand that your capabilities are rare, and there are missions that require exactly the skills you've demonstrated." The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Mitchell's arrival. Elena's unofficial advocate entered the conference room with an expression that mixed relief and concern. He had obviously been briefed on the evaluation results and the subsequent discussions about Elena's future. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Mitchell said, taking a seat at the table. "I've been monitoring the evaluation process, and I want to congratulate you on outstanding performance under challenging circumstances." Elena nodded her appreciation, but she could sense that Mitchell had more to say about the situation. "I also want to discuss the broader implications of what's happened here," Mitchell continued. "Your performance has validated some important principles about personnel selection and assignment policies. The data from this evaluation will likely influence how the military approaches similar situations in the future." Dr. Winchester nodded in agreement. "This evaluation has generated significant interest in academic and policy circles. The results provide compelling evidence about the effectiveness of properly trained and motivated personnel, regardless of traditional demographic assumptions." Elena realized that her personal vindication had become part of a larger discussion about military effectiveness and equal opportunity policies. Her individual performance was being used to support broader arguments about personnel utilization and the capabilities of female service members. "What does that mean for me personally?" Elena asked. Harrison responded with characteristic directness. "It means that your career path is no longer limited by conventional expectations. The evaluation results have opened doors that don't usually open for personnel of your rank and experience level." The offer was flattering and professionally significant, but Elena found herself thinking about the Marines she had served with in Afghanistan. Her identity was deeply connected to her role as a conventional Marine, and the idea of leaving that community felt like abandoning something essential about who she was. "Can I have some time to consider these options?" Elena asked. "Of course," Harrison replied. "This is a significant decision that will affect your entire career. Take the time you need to evaluate what path serves both your personal goals and the needs of the military." The meeting concluded with Elena receiving copies of her evaluation results and detailed information about the various reassignment options. As she left the conference room, her mind was spinning with the implications of what had just occurred. Colonel Mitchell walked with her toward the parking area, his expression thoughtful. "How are you feeling about all this, Rodriguez?" Elena considered the question carefully. "Honestly, sir, it's overwhelming. I came here to defend my record, and Now I'm being offered opportunities one never imagined were possible. That's often how significant career moments happen, Mitchell replied. The evaluation was designed to test you, but it ended up revealing capabilities that even your supporters didn't fully recognize. They walked in silence for a few moments before Mitchell continued. I want you to know that whatever you decide, you've already achieved something important. You've proven that exceptional performance transcends traditional expectations and assumptions. That evening, Elena returned to her temporary quarters and spread the evaluation documentation across her desk. The numbers were impressive, even to her own eyes. Her marksmanship scores exceeded special operations standards. Her tactical decision-making had been rated as exemplary, and the psychological evaluation described her as possessing rare mental resilience. But beyond the statistics, Elena found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The confrontation with General Harrison had been motivated by skepticism about her combat record, but it had evolved into something much more significant. The evaluation had become a comprehensive assessment of her potential rather than simply a verification of her past performance. Elena called her sister Maria, needing to talk through the decision with someone who understood her motivations and priorities. So, they're offering you special operations assignments? Maria asked after Elena explained the situation. Several options. Delta Force, Navy SEALs, some kind of joint task force. All of them would be significant career advancement. Maria was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? I honestly don't know. These opportunities are incredible, but they would mean leaving behind everything I've built as a Marine. Elena, you spent your entire adult life proving yourself to people who doubted you could do what you're obviously capable of doing. Maybe it's time to stop proving yourself and start using your abilities for something bigger. The conversation crystallized something Elena had been struggling to articulate. Her career had been defined by overcoming skepticism and exceeding expectations, but the evaluation results suggested that she had moved beyond the need to prove herself to others. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Elena's quarters. Master Chief Hayes knocked on her door just after dawn, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an expression that suggested he had something important to discuss. Rodriguez, do you have a few minutes to talk about your options? He asked, handing her one of the coffee cups. Elena invited him in, curious about what perspective he might offer. Hayes had extensive experience in special operations, and his assessment would carry significant weight in her decision-making process. I've been thinking about your evaluation results. Hayes began. Those numbers put you in the top 1% of personnel I've worked with, and I've trained some exceptional operators. Elena sipped her coffee, waiting for him to continue. But I also know that special operations isn't just about individual capabilities. It's about finding the right fit between a person's skills and the mission requirements. You need to understand what you'd be getting into. Hayes spent the next hour describing the realities of special operations life. The missions were challenging and often dangerous, but they also provided opportunities to make significant impacts on national security. The work was classified and couldn't be discussed with anyone outside the community, creating a level of professional isolation that some personnel found difficult. The question you need to answer, Hayes concluded, is whether you're looking for personal advancement or the chance to use your abilities for maximum impact. Both are valid motivations, but they lead to different decisions. Elena appreciated the honesty and practical perspective that Hayes offered. His experience provided insights that the policy discussions and career counseling couldn't address. Over the following days, Elena received additional visitors who wanted to discuss her options. Representatives from various special operations units provided detailed briefings about their missions and personnel requirements. Each conversation added new information to consider, but also increased the complexity of her decision. A week after the evaluation concluded, Elena made her choice. She requested a meeting with General Harrison to inform him of her decision and discuss the implementation details. Harrison received her in his office, a space that reflected his years of military service and command responsibility. Photos of military operations and commendation ceremonies covered one wall, while maps of current operational theaters filled another. Rodriguez, have you reached a decision about your reassignment options? Elena stood at attention, her answer clear and confident. Yes, sir. I've decided to accept the assignment with the Joint Task Force, with one condition. Harrison raised an eyebrow. What condition? I want to maintain my status as a Marine. Whatever unit I join, I want to serve as a Marine representative rather than transferring to a different service branch." Harrison smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth Elena had seen from him. "I think that could be arranged." The Joint Task Force specifically requested personnel who could represent their parents' services while contributing to a combined mission. The conversation continued with discussion of assignment details, training requirements, and timeline for the transition. Elena would remain at Quantico for additional specialized training before reporting to her new unit. As the meeting concluded, Harrison stood and extended his hand. "Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. I questioned your record based on assumptions rather than evidence, and you've proven me wrong in the most professional way possible." Elena shook his hand, appreciating the acknowledgement, but not needing it for her own sense of validation. "Thank you, sir. I understand your concerns, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to resolve them through evaluation rather than continued skepticism." Harrison's expression became serious again. "I want you to know that this evaluation process will likely become a model for future assessments. Your performance has provided valuable data about personnel capabilities and evaluation methods." Elena nodded, understanding that her experience would influence how the military approached similar situations in the future. The personal vindication had become part of a larger evolution in military personnel policies. That evening, Elena called her former unit in Afghanistan to share the news with the Marines who had served with her during the engagement that started everything. Sergeant First Class David Park, her former spotter, answered the phone with the casual profanity that characterized Marine communication. "Rodriguez, we heard through the grapevine that you were going through some kind of evaluation process. How'd it turn out?" Elena summarized the results and her decision to accept the Special Operations assignment. The conversation that followed was filled with the dark humor and mutual respect that bonded Marines who had served together in combat. "So they finally figured out what we already knew," Park said with satisfaction. "You're scary accurate with that rifle, and you don't crack under pressure." The evaluation confirmed some things, but it also opened opportunities one hadn't considered, Elena replied. "Well, don't forget us regular Marines when you're off doing secret squirrel stuff," Park said. "And if you ever need someone to spot for you again, I'm available for special assignment." The conversation reminded Elena why her decision to remain a Marine was important to her. The bonds formed in combat were deeper than organizational charts or assignment orders, and maintaining those connections was part of what defined her identity as a service member. Elena spent her final week at Quantico completing paperwork and attending briefings about her new assignment. The Joint Task Force operated under different procedures than conventional units, and the transition required extensive orientation about classified protocols and operational security requirements. On her last day, Colonel Mitchell stopped by to wish her well and provide some final perspective on what she had accomplished. "Rodriguez, I want you to understand something about what happened during this evaluation. You didn't just prove your individual capabilities. You've demonstrated something important about what's possible when people are evaluated based on performance rather than assumptions." Elena appreciated the sentiment, but she also recognized that her success was built on years of training, experience, and the support of Marines who had believed in her capabilities before they were officially recognized. "Thank you, sir. I couldn't have succeeded without the support of people like you who were willing to advocate for fairness in the evaluation process." Mitchell smiled. "Fairness was all you needed, Rodriguez. The rest you accomplished through your own skills and determination." As Elena prepared to leave Quantico for her new assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The confrontation with General Harrison had been intended to discredit her record, but it had instead opened doors to opportunities she had never imagined. The evaluation had tested every aspect of her capabilities and revealed potential she was still learning to understand. More importantly, it had validated the principle that exceptional performance could transcend traditional expectations and assumptions about what different people could accomplish. Elena's new assignment would present challenges and opportunities that would push her capabilities in new directions. But she faced those prospects with the confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she could achieve when given the chance to prove herself. 6 months later, Elena found herself in a position she could never have imagined during her confrontation with General Harrison. The Joint Task Force assignment had taken her deep into the world of classified operations, where her skills were being utilized in ways that pushed the boundaries of conventional military missions. The task force operated from a facility that didn't officially exist, conducting operations that wouldn't be acknowledged by any government. Elena's role as the unit's primary sniper had evolved to include mission planning, intelligence analysis, and training responsibilities that drew on every aspect of her military experience. But it was a phone call on a Tuesday morning that would bring her story full circle, connecting her current success to the challenges that had tested her resolve months earlier. "Rodriguez, I need you in my office immediately." Colonel Patricia Williams, the task force commander, spoke with the kind of urgency that typically preceded significant mission briefings. Elena made her way through the secure corridors of the facility, past offices, and briefing rooms where classified operations were planned and executed. The environment was unlike anything she had experienced in conventional military units, combining cutting-edge technology with the kind of operational secrecy that surrounded the most sensitive national security missions. Colonel Williams was waiting with a tablet, displaying what appeared to be a news article. Her expression was serious, but carried undertones of something that might have been satisfaction. "Rodriguez, are you aware that General Harrison has been nominated for promotion to the Joint Chiefs of Staff?" Elena was surprised by the information, but she wasn't sure why it was relevant to her current assignment. "No, ma'am. I haven't been following personnel announcements from the Pentagon." Williams turned the tablet toward Elena, revealing a headline that made her stomach tighten. "Military Gender Bias Scandal Threatens General's Promotion." The article detailed allegations that Harrison had systematically questioned the capabilities of female service members, using evaluation processes designed to discredit rather than assess their performance. Elena's name appeared prominently in the article, along with details about the evaluation that had vindicated her record. "It appears that someone leaked information about your evaluation to investigative journalists," Williams continued. "The story has generated significant attention in Congress and the media." Elena read through the article with growing concern. The details were accurate, but presented in a way that painted Harrison as deliberately obstructing female advancement in the military. While Elena had disagreed with his initial skepticism, she also knew that the evaluation process had been fair and comprehensive once it was implemented. "Ma'am, this article doesn't tell the complete story. General Harrison was skeptical initially, but he conducted a thorough evaluation and acknowledged my capabilities when the results were clear." Williams nodded. "I figured you'd say something like that. The question is what you want to do about it." Elena was confused by the implication. "What do you mean, ma'am?" "Harrison's nomination hearing is scheduled for next week. The Senate Armed Services Committee has requested your testimony about the evaluation process and Harrison's conduct during the investigation." The idea of testifying before Congress about her personal experiences was daunting and unwelcome. Elena had worked hard to move beyond the controversy that had brought her to the task force, focusing instead on the challenging missions that utilized her capabilities effectively. "Is this testimony mandatory, ma'am?" "No, but your perspective would be valuable in providing a complete picture of what actually happened. The media coverage has been largely one-sided, focusing on the initial skepticism without acknowledging how professionally the situation was ultimately resolved." Elena spent the rest of the day considering her options. Testifying would mean returning to the public attention she had worked to avoid, but it would also provide an opportunity to set the record straight about Harrison's conduct and the evaluation process. That evening, she called Colonel Mitchell, who had continued to serve as an unofficial mentor during her transition to special operations. His perspective on the political implications would help her understand the broader context of the situation. Mitchell speaking. "Colonel, it's Elena Rodriguez. I need some advice about a situation that's developed." Mitchell listened as Elena explained the article, Harrison's nomination, and the request for congressional testimony. His response was thoughtful and measured. "Rodriguez, this is ultimately about more than just Harrison's promotion. It's about establishing precedents for how the military handles questions about personnel capabilities and equal opportunity." Elena understood the broader implications, but she was also concerned about the impact of her testimony on Harrison personally. Despite their initial confrontation, she respected his willingness to acknowledge her capabilities when presented with clear evidence. "What would you do in my position, sir? I'd testify truthfully about what happened, both the initial skepticism and the professional way the evaluation was conducted. The truth serves everyone's interest better than allowing incomplete information to drive policy decisions." The conversation helped clarify Elena's thinking about her responsibilities in the situation. She had always believed in the importance of accurate information, whether in combat situations or personnel evaluations. The following morning, Elena informed Colonel Williams of her decision to testify before the Senate committee. Williams arranged for Elena to receive legal counsel and briefings about congressional testimony procedures. Elena spent several days preparing for the hearing, reviewing documentation from the evaluation process, and consulting with attorneys about the scope of her testimony. The preparation was as intensive as mission planning for a combat operation, requiring attention to detail and consideration of multiple contingencies. On the day of the hearing, Elena found herself in the Hart Senate office building, wearing her dress uniform and carrying a folder of documentation that supported her testimony. The committee room was larger than she had expected, with television cameras and journalists creating an atmosphere of public scrutiny that felt foreign after months of classified operations. General Harrison was already seated at the witness table when Elena arrived. He nodded politely in her direction, his expression professional but unreadable. Elena took her assigned seat, noting the positioning that would require them to testify separately rather than together. Senator Margaret Thompson, the committee chairwoman, called the hearing to order and outlined the purpose of the proceedings. Harrison's nomination was being considered in the context of allegations about his conduct regarding female personnel, and the committee required additional information to make an informed decision. Harrison testified first, defending his record and explaining his perspective on the evaluation process that had involved Elena. His testimony was professional and detailed, acknowledging his initial skepticism while emphasizing the thoroughness and fairness of the evaluation once it was implemented. General Harrison, Senator Thompson asked during the questioning period, "Do you believe your initial reaction to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's record was influenced by gender bias?" Harrison considered the question carefully before responding. "Senator, I was skeptical of claims that seemed to exceed normal performance parameters. In retrospect, I acknowledge that my skepticism may have been influenced by unconscious assumptions about capabilities. However, once the evaluation was conducted, I fully acknowledged Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's exceptional abilities." When Elena was called to testify, she found herself facing a panel of senators whose questions would determine Harrison's future and potentially influence military policy for years to come. She had faced enemy fire in combat, but the political scrutiny felt equally challenging in its own way. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Senator Thompson began, "please describe your experience with General Harrison and the evaluation process that followed your combat deployment." Elena spoke clearly and directly, describing the initial confrontation, the comprehensive evaluation, and Harrison's ultimate acknowledgement of her capabilities. She was careful to present both the challenging and positive aspects of her interactions with the general. "Did you feel that General Harrison's initial skepticism was motivated by gender bias?" asked Senator Michael Roberts, a committee member known for his direct questioning style. Elena had anticipated this question and prepared her response carefully. "Senator, I cannot speak to General Harrison's internal motivations. What I can say is that once the evaluation process was implemented, it was thorough, fair, and professionally conducted. General Harrison acknowledged my capabilities when presented with clear evidence." The questioning continued for nearly 2 hours, with senators exploring various aspects of Elena's experience and the broader implications for military personnel policies. Elena answered each question honestly while avoiding speculation about motivations or broader policy recommendations. During the final portion of her testimony, Elena was asked to provide her overall assessment of the evaluation process and its outcomes. "Senators, the evaluation was challenging and comprehensive, testing every aspect of my capabilities as a Marine. While the initial skepticism was difficult to experience, the process ultimately validated my record and opened opportunities that have allowed me to serve more effectively." Senator Thompson asked the final question. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, based on your experience, do you believe General Harrison is qualified for promotion to the Joint Chiefs of Staff?" Elena considered her response carefully, understanding that her answer would carry significant weight in the committee's deliberations. "Senator, General Harrison demonstrated professional leadership during the evaluation process. He was willing to acknowledge evidence that contradicted his initial assumptions and he supported my career advancement based on demonstrated capabilities rather than preconceptions. I believe those qualities are valuable in senior military leadership. After Elena's testimony concluded, she remained in the hearing room to observe the committee's deliberations. The senators discussed her testimony and its implications for Harrison's nomination, with several members noting her balanced and professional presentation of the facts. Senator Thompson summarized the committee's perspective. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's testimony provides important context about General Harrison's conduct. While there were initial concerns about his skepticism, the evidence suggests that he conducted a fair evaluation and appropriately acknowledged the results. The committee ultimately voted to approve Harrison's nomination, with Elena's testimony playing a significant role in their decision. Her balanced presentation had provided the context needed to understand the complete story rather than relying on incomplete media coverage. Following the hearing, Elena was approached by General Harrison outside the committee room. His expression was serious, but carried genuine gratitude. "Rodriguez, thank you for your testimony. You could have allowed the incomplete story to stand, but you chose to provide the full truth even when it supported someone who had initially doubted you." Elena returned his handshake. "General, the truth serves everyone better than incomplete information. The evaluation process worked as intended, and you demonstrated professional leadership by acknowledging the results." Harrison nodded. "I want you to know that your performance during that evaluation changed my understanding of personnel capabilities and evaluation methods. The military is stronger because of service members like you." The conversation marked a resolution to the conflict that had begun months earlier. Elena had proven her capabilities through performance rather than argument, and Harrison had demonstrated the professional flexibility to acknowledge evidence that contradicted his initial assumptions. Elena returned to her task force assignment with a renewed appreciation for the importance of accurate information and fair evaluation processes. The congressional testimony had been challenging, but it had also provided an opportunity to contribute to important discussions about military personnel policies. Colonel Williams greeted her return with characteristic directness. "Rodriguez, how do you feel about being back in the shadows after your moment in the public spotlight?" Elena smiled. "Honestly, ma'am, I prefer it this way. The classified missions we conduct here allow me to use my capabilities without political complications." "Good, because we have a mission that requires exactly your skill set. The intelligence community has identified a high-value target who requires the kind of precision engagement you demonstrated during your evaluation." Elena felt the familiar surge of focus that accompanied mission briefings. The political controversy was behind her, and she could return to the work that defined her identity as a Marine and as a professional soldier. Over the following months, Elena's reputation within the special operations community grew based on her performance rather than political circumstances. Her evaluation results had opened doors, but her continued success was based on consistently excellent mission execution and professional development. A year after the evaluation that had changed her career trajectory, Elena received an unexpected letter from a young female Marine serving her first deployment in Afghanistan. The Marine had read about Elena's story and was inspired by her example of perseverance and professional excellence. Elena wrote back, emphasizing the importance of focusing on mission performance rather than external recognition or controversy. The best way to serve the Marine Corps and the country was through dedicated professional development and commitment to the values that define military service. The letter exchange reminded Elena that her story had implications beyond her own career. Female service members were watching her example, and her success provided evidence that exceptional performance could overcome initial skepticism and institutional barriers. Elena's current assignment continued to provide challenges that pushed her capabilities in new directions. The Joint Task Force conducted operations that required the highest levels of skill and judgment, and her role had expanded to include training responsibilities for other personnel joining the unit. But perhaps most importantly, Elena had found her place within the military structure as someone whose capabilities were fully recognized and utilized. The evaluation that had begun as a challenge to her integrity had become the foundation for opportunities that matched her skills and dedication. On quiet evenings, Elena would sometimes reflect on the journey that had brought her from a confrontational meeting with General Harrison to her current position in special operations. The path had been challenging and sometimes uncertain, but it had led to exactly where she belonged. The Marine Corps had invested years in developing her capabilities, and she was finally in a position where those capabilities could be used to their fullest extent. The political controversy had been difficult, but it had also created opportunities that might never have existed otherwise. Elena Rodriguez had proven herself like a SEAL, not through dramatic gestures or public declarations, but through consistent professional excellence and the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what she was capable of accomplishing. The truth had always been her strongest weapon, and it had served her well throughout a career that continued to evolve in directions she was still discovering. General Harrison's promotion had been approved, and he had gone on to serve with distinction on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But for Elena, the real victory had been the opportunity to serve in a role that fully utilized her capabilities while maintaining her identity as a Marine. The story that had begun with accusations of lying had ended with recognition of exceptional truth. Elena had not only proven her kill count, but had demonstrated something more important: the value of fair evaluation, professional integrity, and the determination to excel regardless of the obstacles placed in the path forward.